Welcome back, everybody. We're back on stage for our next speaker. Those of you who haven't finished to do another set of push-ups, this is probably the right time to quickly do it. And if not, Adam Samson is the Director of Clinical Operation at Curebase. And, you know, when we think about digital therapeutics and we think how that model can fit into the old-fashioned way that we did clinical trials, the way the big elephant, big pharma is usually operating, there's always the question are these two actually concepts merge? Can you really take a digital therapeutic concept and fit it into the old traditional way of doing clinical trials, or that requires a more reimagining where you consider more virtual, more decentralized approach? And Adam's presentation is exactly focused on that. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Adam to the stage. Adam, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Amir. Thanks everybody for joining. And I'll be saving my push-ups until after this presentation. So don't worry, not winded. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. This is a really exciting thing for us at Curebase to participate in DTX. The presentation that I have prepared for everybody today is comparing traditional with virtual trials, specifically for digital therapeutics. There was a presentation yesterday by Dr. Isaac Rodriguez Chavez, excellent presentation around decentralized trials. Fortunately, this is a really big topic, so we are covering kind of different aspects. I'll be really diving into, in particular, the benefits and challenges of these types of trials specific for digital therapeutics. Just a tiny bit about my background about myself. So I've spent the past decade in clinical research across multiple domains. Currently at Curebase as Director of Clinical Operations, where we specialize in running virtual and hybrid clinical studies for digital therapeutics. So before we dive in, I do want to take just a moment to kind of give you some background on where information within this presentation comes from. So as Dr. Rodriguez Chavez alluded to yesterday, regulators across the globe right now are actively working to recodify how exactly these trials should be conducted. In the meantime, we have a number of expert groups. These are nonprofits that are made up of really all of the companies, many that are represented here today. So the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, this is a multi-stakeholder group. Transcelerate Biopharma is a group of leading pharmaceutical companies. The Association of Clinical Research Organizations, a group of very large CROs. The National Academies has a forum on innovation within clinical trials. And lastly, the newly minted Decentralized Trials and Research Alliance, which is a multi-stakeholder group that was put together specifically to address these challenges. So I'd love to dive deep into each one of these groups and what they're doing, but given our time today, I've linked each of them here so that you can, if you like, after go in and see the deliverables that they put forth. And Curebase is active in a number of these groups trying to work to set standards and best practices for virtual studies. So before we dive into virtual studies, I think it's important that we just take a step back and say, what is a traditional trial for comparison? You might hear of them also referred to as conventional trials. So, 20 years ago, we didn't really need to ask the question because, traditional trials were just clinical trials. It's only now within comparison to these new modalities. So a traditional trial generally occurred at a physical location, which we call a site, or many sites. All of the activities conducted by the staff on site and overseen by a principal investigator, oftentimes with others like clinical research coordinators working on the study. Study participants would then have to travel to this physical location in order for all of the assessments to be completed. And generally, data were collected using paper documents and then later transcribed into an electronic system as the final data repository. In contrast, virtual trials, which you might also hear decentralized, direct to patient, remote, or siteless terms being used. So these may include any or all of the following elements. So no physical trial sites, all visits are performed via telemedicine or through the use of mobile healthcare providers, and all data are captured remotely through the use of remote technologies. This definition came from Citi, but it is pretty well shared across the groups I mentioned. So just like a traditional trial, you need to have a principal investigator overseeing a number of staff. This time, though, they're now in a virtual environment, and we'll dive deeper into what that means and how to operationalize that. Data are recorded generally using an electronic system and not on paper first and then transcribed into a system, which another system, which is also significant. Hybrid trials, as you might expect, are kind of in the middle, right? So you get a bit of both, some virtual activities, some that require participants to travel to a physical site. Oftentimes you'll hear studies that are referred to as virtual or decentralized actually are hybrid trials. The terminology doesn't always fit. So good to keep these just overall, what is the needs of the trial in mind rather than sticking to one tag. In this case, you have remote and on-site staff and activities happening. So take a digital therapeutic study that you might, the actual digital therapeutic itself can be administered in a remote environment, but perhaps in order to qualify participants, depending on your therapeutic area, you might need an MRI or some other procedure where we can't do it remotely and we can't bring that to the patient. So in that type of case, we might have the participant learn about this study online. They go through telemedicine interaction with the coordinator, consent to the study, do some initial eligibility work, and then we send them to a physical location, to the site, to have the procedure done. And then perhaps the rest of the study they can do remotely. So it gives us some flexibility, which is always a really nice thing to have, both for patients, but also for sponsors as well. So when it comes to benefits to clinical trials that are done in this way using virtual and hybrid methods, we've split out 4 buckets here. So speed, cost, diversity, and what we're terming COVID-19 robustness. So when it comes to speed, faster trial participant recruitment, because you're able to capture a much wider geographic group. You're not limited to a number of sites. Increased convenience can speed up your trial because it means more participants might enroll because there aren't those burdens of travel in the way. This can shorten the clinical trial timelines. And also, when you're able to see data in real time because it's direct data entry, it allows you to make some decisions that can shave time off your overall study timeline. Cost, of course, is an important factor. So there's potential for reduced costs due to shorter timelines, obviously. But also, and importantly, as I had mentioned with traditional trials, you generally are recording on paper first and then transcribing to the electronic data capture system. So in order to clean that data, if you will, we need to send someone to that site. So someone on behalf of the sponsor, CRO, typically called a monitor or a CRA, needs to fly or travel to that site and stay there for a day or 2 days and do that comparison. This can, as you imagine, be quite costly. Improved participant retention can save cost in your trial because if participants over time learn that it's just too burdensome for them to be doing so many trips, they can withdraw from the study. If you have a really high attrition rate, this can either you need to recruit more participants or even worse, you analyze your data and find you don't have the statistical power because your sample size was too low. And another point here that's really salient for the digital therapeutics community is that these can make it more representative of real world administration of a digital therapeutic, which I don't have to go too deep into with this audience that, that's been really important for seeking reimbursement. Payers really like to see that. Diversity is another key benefit. So the fact, again, that we have a larger patient pool to draw from because we're across the country or across the globe is a big benefit. Particularly, there's an advantage with rare diseases because you have a limited population that can be dispersed over a wide area. So it gives you more access to those patients. And I also noted here increased opportunities for participant engagement. This is, as we all know, unfortunately, there are some communities that really, they lack trust in the clinical trial process. And for good reason, many of them. And this is a way for us to reach them where they are and to help work with the community in a better way to try and increase the diversity in a trial. And lastly, as a benefit here is to support clinical trial continuity in the case of a widespread event like a pandemic. In these cases, data monitoring can be done remotely, as mentioned, but significant here because, as we all saw going into the pandemic, some of these sites actually stopped allowing people on site because, and for good reason, for safety. In those cases, if you had paper source on site, you were not able to get at those data. So it's a great thing to have. And also the ability to collect usability data from participants is something that we've found our sponsors, in particular in the digital therapeutic space, found very useful during the pandemic. Okay, and in terms of challenges for virtual and hybrid trials, so I will likely spend the bulk of the rest of the presentation on this slide because it's all, it's very exciting that we're doing these trials, but we can't, forget that if they're not conducted well, if they're not really planned from the beginning with these strategies in mind, then there are a lot of ways that they cannot be successful. We'll run through them here. All of these are areas that, if addressed properly, your study can run just fine in a virtual environment. So the first one, regional data protection and privacy laws or concerns. So, sharing health information electronically means that all the electronic systems must be in compliance with ICH-GCP and other local laws. A good way to do this is, early engagement with regulators. That's a really good strategy. But don't assume that virtual trials will be held to a substantially stricter standard than a traditional trial, because on the contrary, we're hearing from many regulators that they want innovation within this space. Operational challenges. So, this might be a lack of community and provider engagement. The way to address this is, proactive risk management, beginning all the way at protocol design. All aspects of a virtual trial should be described from end-to-end perspective so that you can identify those areas where there might be operational challenge and build in strategies and mitigations. Technical barriers, of course. So this might be a digital health technology user interface focus. For traditional site-based data input by study teams, as well as allowing participants to review content and contribute their data remotely. The way to get around this is just make sure that you have a really good solution, both software and services to go with it, so that you have a team that is accustomed to working around these solutions. Cultural barriers. So this might be, that the technology might fail. A good way to do this, and addressing with the regulators here, is to engage with participants or patients within your within the target population, and also sites to better understand their perspective and their experiences, and that should help you to design your trial around any cultural concerns. Licensure limitations is important to consider. There are regulations for telemedicine, state licensing requirements that vary state to state in this country and across the globe. And it really needs to be tailored based on, again, your therapeutic area, the delivery, the safety, it maintains participated, using investigators licensed in multiple states, contracting with companies who provide licensed and mobile healthcare providers. But again, and especially with digital therapeutics, depending on the nature of the trial and any potential safety concerns with the given population, regional PIs might not be necessary. You might be able to have a single PI overseeing a number of regions. So just be sure, if you have an internal regulatory group, work with them, or make sure you have a partner who's accustomed to regulations. Next point here, there's a principal investigator oversight. So this is actually something that is of most concern to our sponsors oftentimes, and for good reason. Regardless of the approach or the design of the study, sponsor investigator responsibilities don't change, and virtual trials should not be held to a different standard. And at Curebase, what we do to address this is we actually create a standalone PI oversight plan. So this, similar to a communication plan or a monitoring plan, this is what the PI develop, so that unlike a traditional trial where the PI is overseeing staff that are down the hall, here we need to define when is the PI going to be meeting with these staff, what does training look like, how does the staff meet with the PI ad hoc when they need them. Importantly as well is, how does the PI make sure oversight of the participants, right? How can they receive, alerts if there might be safety events or other issues? How can they drill down into those data? So really defining that well, whether it's in a PI oversight plan or some other document, I highly recommend. It'll give you a sense of confidence that there'll be adequate oversight. It's a great way to document as well. So if regulators come and inspect the study, it's clear that there was adequate oversight. For staff training, I don't have a ton to say on this one other than optimize for a remote environment. I think we've all, since the pandemic, and at least one training that was meant to be in person. They just took it remote, and you sit there for 6 hours listening to slides. Just make sure that you work with a provider or someone within your company that's accustomed to delivering trainings in a remote environment, and be sure to document training. That's one of the biggest things that folks get cited for after FDA inspections. Safety monitoring is paramount. You need to clearly articulate remote safety monitoring procedures and train the PI and staff on any processes that are unique to virtual trials. Also, again, depending on the nature of your digital therapeutic and the patient population, make sure that the participant in a remote location knows how to get in contact with someone if in case of a potential adverse event. For limitations of connectivity between systems, the big thing here is try and avoid multiple platforms if at all possible. Is really burdensome for sites and for participants, and it's a quick way to get folks to drop from your study. If you have many different logins that participants need to have, they can kind of get burnt out on the study quick. If possible, a single platform solution is great. If not, just try and keep those down so that you don't lose that optimization. Inadvertent discrimination. So an example here, participants without access to technology. This is still, even though technology seems ubiquitous, there are still regions, particularly with multinational trials, that we really need to keep this in mind. And again, in the design of the trial, perhaps provisioning devices or some other means of making sure that you're capturing the full scope of that population. And lastly here, innate resistance to change. Not a ton to say here, other than our industry has been extremely slow to adopt technology, unlike other industries, but that has really been moving recently. This segues into a slide. So in terms of adoption of virtual and hybrid trials within digital therapeutics, so a quick search of clinicaltrials.gov shows 16 clinical trials that are, clearly marked as digital therapeutic studies. Of those, 7 of the 16 are fully virtual, meaning there's no, the participant never travels to a physical location. Everything's done remotely. And 14 of the 16 are virtual or hybrid, so all but a couple. So you can see that within the digital therapeutics community, they're really embracing these types of trials. And just to give a sense of the larger community of conducting clinical trials, a recent survey found that the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of these methods, with 75% of respondents indicating that at least some of their trials are virtual, and really surprising, 38% showing more than half of their trials are decentralized or virtual. So definitely a lot of interest in these new methodologies. Okay, and in terms of just mentioning from the regulator side, this is a note from Scott Gottlieb, who was the former commissioner of the FDA. We have their support as well. Bringing trials to the patient, it's an FDA priority, leads to more diverse patient populations, and is more representative of real world. So it's has support from all the way up and down the chain. With that, I know we have some questions, and I want to make sure that we have time to get to some of these.
Thank you very much, Adam, for this very wonderful presentation. I'm seeing a couple of questions here from the audience. One was from Jose, I believe. He was asking about how the IRBs and the ethics committee keeping up with this massive load of review and overseeing those decentralized trials. Do you have any?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Jose. And so we work with a number of different IRBs, ones that everyone here has likely heard of. And especially, you're seeing a lot of IRBs consolidate now into larger groups. You have the big ones now, like Word Copernicus Group, and now Advara recently merged with IntegriView. I think that they're handling it quite fine. I've been really pleased to see how quickly IRBs have been able to adjust and understand what the needs are for reviewing a trial that's going to be conducted in this type of environment. So what does that mean? Everything patient-facing needs to go in front of the IRB. So our ability to either do a demo video where we actually show exactly what that patient journey looks like. Of course, not with a real patient or real data, but sharing that with the IRB, or sharing screenshots of the individual things. We've been working. I think the best way to make sure that you're working well with your IRB is to try and pull them in as early as possible during protocol development, get them engaged in it, let them have a seat at the table to help guide development.
Thank you, Adam. And Ravi here is asking about the financial consideration here. Is there a great saving here? What is the per patient cost of a decentralized trial? You can obviously save a lot of infrastructure that are usually spent for overhead at the site. How is it really cheaper to do it that way?
So it generally is. There's generally ways that we can optimize and save money doing at least some aspects virtually. One important note, and folks in this industry like us to focus on is saving cost is a great thing, but we want to make sure that we have the right tools in place in order to conduct the study. Nonetheless, if we are not having to travel to a physical location, you can imagine a huge part of the budget for a lot of these big trials is you've got 100 sites and the study's going for 2 years, and you have to go to the site maybe 8 times. Just imagine the travel costs associated with that. Now, some of that money will likely go to the fact that you want to work with a better software solution where you can really feel like you're on the site, at the site in real time to see data. So perhaps a bit of, sometimes companies find the first time they do this trial, there might be a little bit more upfront in getting these type of solutions. But nonetheless, Yes, generally it shortens the timeline, which is another way you're decreasing your project management costs. So you can find real opportunities for decreasing the overall cost of trials.
Thank you, Adam. We have to wrap it up here, and I think this is an area that we could probably have a dedicated conference just about that. In fact, I encourage everybody to check the Curebase website, but also another source of information that I'm just posting here on the chat is the Decentralized Trial Research Alliance, a relatively new organization, actually a massive consortium that was put together by the one and only Craig Lipset and Amir Jalali, of course. A lot of companies joined that massive movement under the slogan of "We're not going back." So we're not going back into that old model. We might consider hybrid model of trials that are partially virtual, partially not. But this is really a way to go. I'm just posting it here, and with that in mind, I'd like to really thank Adam for this wonderful presentation.
Thanks everybody. And yeah, Curebase is proud to be a founding member of the DTRA and working actively with them. Feel free, if you do have any questions, you can reach out to me directly, Adam at Curebase. And we also have a booth at the Expo. So, and thanks Amir, thanks everybody for taking the time. Hope it was helpful.
Thank you. So just in terms of housekeeping, everybody, we have like about a 1 minute sort of virtual break here. If you guys want to grab a snack or check on the dog or make a quick phone call to your mother-in-law to apologize for something you absolutely didn't do, that would be the right time probably. And we will be here back shortly in sessions with the next panel discussion of the day, which will be moderated by Jenna Carl. So see you soon.
Thanks everyone.